The following information comes from my novel, The Splitting of the Tree, which is the first book to the War for Achamed trilogy. For context, click the link above, and then come back to this video. Thank you, and enjoy. In the previous episode, we recounted the ancient days of Ergos. Ergos, one of the more colorful countries in Achamed, has a rich and vibrant culture. In its ancient past, it suffered from a number of terrible conflicts. But finally, at the end of the Coalition War, the nation united under the banner of King Palmos. But all nations are doomed to die, and the great but terrible Second Hellenian Empire invaded and absorbed Ergos into its vast collection of subjugated states long after the death of Palmos. This is the story of Ergos, before and during the Third Great Magic War. Following the annexation of Ergos, the Second Hellenian Empire began to build roads to connect the country to the rest of the empire. The Hellenians proceeded to also build fortresses to garrison large armies of men who were tasked with taking care of the last vestiges of resistance in Ergos. Ergos had no chance of resisting or revolting, as the Hellenians and their emperor practiced magic, an art that the Ergosians lacked. Eventually, over time, the Ergosian and Hellenian cultures began to cross over, as the native language of Ergish and its native dialects became lost to time and were replaced by the language of Hellenish. The next 1,000 years was relatively uneventful for Ergos. Ergosians would be recruited in the Hellenian military and fought in the many wars of expansion where the Hellenians would feebly attempt to continue the lifespan of their decaying empire. But like the First Hellenian Empire, it would come to fall, as slowly over time various people groups were able to win their independence from the empire, and the Hellenians eventually stopped expanding their country as they lacked the resources to do so and were more concerned with managing the lands and peoples they had absorbed. There was another problem brewing within the empire, and that problem was religion. Traditionally, because of their strong occultist roots, the Second Hellenian Empire was an ascensionistic theocracy. Ascensionism is a religious philosophy in Achamed that believes that humanity can ascend to godhood or reach some state of spiritual enlightenment by means of practicing magic. Most of the time, ascensionistic religions were polytheistic and had a pantheon of dead sages that were revered as gods. Such was the case with Hellenian mythology, as they believed in a pantheon of gods representing aspects of nature, and they also revered dead and living emperors, believing them to be gods as well. Consequently, those with magic powers became hedonistic and conceited in nature. Thus, they started to look down upon those without said powers. Sages themselves also suffered, as magic can and will dwindles one's life and is highly addictive. If magic is done far too much by an individual in one sitting, one can self-combust into flame as a consequence of utilizing more energy than the body can handle. Sages are also known for having a shorter lifespan than that of regular humans. Unfortunately, the Empire made no efforts to police the addiction of magic, but rather encouraged the misuse of it. These factors led to the Empire's residents turning to a centuries-old religion known as Saloism, a monotheistic religion that forbade acts of magic. For centuries, Salists and occultists have been at odds, fighting in the Great Magic Wars, which were terrible religious crusades fought over the fate of the world. The previous First Great Magic War ended in a victory for occultism. Because of this, Salists were forced into exile in northern Atlos, Morsos, and parts of Ajmeria. Otherwise, they would face violent persecution from the newly formed occultist nations. Consequently, the rest of the 6 continents were either occultist or of a pagan tribal religion outside of occultism, like the Ergosians were before they were absorbed into the empire. As time progressed, these issues began to worsen, resulting in flat-out riots and economic turmoil. These problems exploded in 2065 AHE when the Emperor Akhari Haji vanished without a trace and without naming an heir. This was especially problematic as Haji was a Muqaddas, meaning that he was the human lord of all magic, making him able to control the will of his followers and also making him the greatest of all magicians. Before a Muqaddas dies, they must pass on their powers to an heir, or else the powers of the Muqaddas will evaporate. But with no heir, and the powers of the Muqaddas seemingly lost, There was no one to unify the sages of the empire and the rest of the imperial subjects. Thusly, the Second Hellenian Empire had fallen into rubble, like its predecessor, as numerous sages rose up and formed their own warlord states, each claiming to be the rightful heir to the now disappeared Muqaddams. Amidst the bloody confusion, the sailless religion, no longer wanting to be persecuted by its adversaries, took up arms and fought against the feuding magicians for control over the empire and inevitably control over the entire world. Although the fate of the Hellenian Empire was unclear, one thing was for certain: it would never be the same ever again.